Do you have any updates in your life since in the last 6 months because you were just starting your network when we talked the six
Hmm.
months ago.
Yeah, the somatic salvia network. So that's going well. It's still, I think maybe there's maybe like oh, I don't know, 15 people on it. So it's small and we have almost weekly integration calls. And so on average, like there's maybe like 5 people showing up for the integration calls, which is actually really a really nice number. To have weekly calls every Sunday. We do it. And 5 is nice because it gives enough people chance to each have a say during the call. And I've been really just astounded at the vulnerability and the depth and the closeness and the bonds that are forming in this little network. So that's been going really well. Um, and yeah, it was kind of cool. I posted the Johns Hopkins experience report on
Oh, I
Reddit.
saw that a few days ago.
Right, right. And it was cool. In one of the subreddits that I posted it, one of the people that responded to the post was actually the person who purified the Salvinorin A that was used in that study.
Oh, just I have not yet read the link, and I remember
Mm.
asking you about the results, so I'm interested. But I did see that conversation that you had with him.
Yeah, yeah, which I think it's fantastic because so I've been wanting to pick his brain a little bit more and see how his extraction technique differs from mine. Because when I make my salvia extract to put on these little pre-dose capsules, I take it pretty much all the way to pure salvinorin A, and that way it gives me really, really accurate dosing. Um, but I imagine that the extraction technique that this guy used was a lot different, and so I'd be curious to see how it's different.
Yeah. And then
But
I've never done that myself. And I don't know a whole lot. I've read a little bit about it, but so you can take it extremely pure, and then from
yeah,
that extremely pure state, you put it back on leaf and get the extract that you want.
exactly. That's how I can make my doses so reliably consistent. Because um, one of the first stages of the extract, you get sort of like this crude extract. And that's not really reliable based on weight because it could weigh a certain amount, but that doesn't mean that it has a certain amount of salvinorin A in it. And so the more of those other waxy lipids and chlorophylls and stuff like that that you take out, then you get more accurate measurements with your salvinorin A.
Yeah, you told me that. And you were saying that you could tell, roughly speaking, by the color, right? That if it's super black, that's kind of a bad sign because it's sort of tarry.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, so that's people after they've said on Reddit like, oh, like this ADX extract, it's so strong, look how black it is, or it's black because it's strong, and it's just like, no, your extract really shouldn't be that black. That just means that they did a really shoddy job of the extraction.
Yeah, and I've noticed some brands like Purple Sticky, I like other people really trash them. But I actually think that their salvia might be uh higher grade than almost everybody else because it tends to be, if I remember right, it's more like a dark green than a gray or black.
I see. I haven't used
And
that.
they claim that their process is better and that their stuff is higher quality, and that's why their prices are so much higher.
Mm,
So there might, even though I'm really not a fan of their marketing, basically
mm.
their marketing strategy, but their salvia might be kind of better than the like salvia dragon or
Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
salvia.
it's hard to know without knowing what the actual extraction process is. And also sometimes stronger doesn't necessarily mean better quality. It could be more concentrated, but that means that all the other like tars and stuff are concentrated as well. And I love showing this just for the sake of comparison that this is all the black stuff that's removed from just one small extraction. This is
Oh
a
wow.
tiny extraction. And I'm not even going to touch this stuff because it is sticky and it doesn't even like wash off your hands. You got to wash your hands with like soap multiple times or use rubbing alcohol to get it off. So this is all the tars and stuff that when you buy black extract, that's what they leave in there. And that leads to like a groggier experience and more headaches and stuff like that afterwards as well. And
uh, and inconsistent strength.
inconsistent. Yeah, because they say like, oh, it's like 40x, but what they're also taking into account is the weight of all that stuff.
Yeah.
What, yeah, yeah. But how did we get on that? Oh, because we were talking about the Johns Hopkins study, and so one of the things that they found in that study, it's kind of a in-depth results to read. A lot of it is way over the layman's head as far as the neurobiologically um, detailed description of what they found. But one of the main things that they found in simple terms is that salvia affects the default mode network more than any of the other psychedelics. So, you know, everyone talks about the default mode network with regards to like LSD and mushrooms, um, and that's where they say a lot of the benefits from these substances come from is by working on the default mode network. And as many people know, the default mode network, one of the things that it's responsible for is creating our autobiographical sense of ourself.
Right.
And so it makes sense that on a high dose of salvia, our autobiographical sense of self completely goes out the window. Um, and we can have very foreign, alien-like experiences where we perceive ourselves to be. I was talking to someone the other day, and he smoked a higher dose of salvia, and he said that he became the, at the end of a shoelace, sometimes the shoelace is wrapped up in that little plastic wrapping.
Yeah.
He became the plastic tip of the end of a shoelace. And he was like, how I knew I was that, I don't know, but I was definitely that. So yeah, it's a hoot. But I mean, other things is my salvia garden is doing really well. I actually need to do a lot of repotting today. Here's one of the salvias that I just started rooting just a couple of weeks ago. And but
Really?
already
How big was it when you started? It was a lot smaller than that?
I took a long cutting. So these two, actually not a couple of weeks, about a month ago. So these two are new. These guys here are new. When I started, I just had this long piece in here.
Oh,
But I
okay.
took a long cutting from a big plant. So the stem itself goes from here to I think down to here. So it was a long stem. And let's see, what's a size comparison?
The reason
Is
I ask is because I bought one. Yeah, okay. So it's a lot is in the soil.
Yeah,
I bought one.
yeah.
Uh I am blanking. I did an interview with him and it's on my channel, but I'm blanking on his website. Which is too bad. But okay.
Do you know his
And it's
username?
a beautiful plant, but he lives in Arizona.
Oh, okay.
It's a beautiful plant, but like it's hardly grown at all. It's not like dying, but
Yeah.
that was like months and months ago, and it's only grown a little tiny bit. Like at
Mm.
this rate, I'll never. I mean, I didn't really
He'll
have
get like
any.
2 leaves a year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, at this rate, I will never get to use it even for a cutting because I would like to, um, expand that part of my world. But I mean, I
Right.
guess I could go to him and be like, hey, what's wrong, or buy another one, or
Well,
but it is weird because he told me the same thing that they grow fast, but mine sure doesn't.
sometimes it grows super slow and sometimes they grow really fast. It's you got to find the sweet spot of their conditions. I mean, I've had some plants that are just like inching along like snails and just like not growing. But I guess one question is, have you repotted it since you've gotten it?
Well, it came. I haven't, but it's got a pretty nice big pot. Here, I'll go get it.
Yeah, go get it.
I must have watered it yesterday. I'm getting a little bit wet. It leans because it's leaning towards the window,
Okay.
and that's my hands.
Right, right.
And so it also browns a little bit. But
Mm-hmm.
he told me that the original leaves browning is pretty normal because then the new ones, like, it takes a while for it to get used to its new home.
It does.
Uh,
So, I would say it's probably time for a bigger pot for that one.
you think?
Yeah, because that is only like what, a gallon?
Yeah, it's smaller than that.
One
That
gallon pot?
yeah, that doesn't. I mean, like, well, here's my large coffee cup.
Right.
Here's my telephone.
Yeah, and if you look at it, there's a saying in like gardening and so on and so forth, like and just with health plant in general, as oh crap, what is it now? As above, so below.
Mm,
Actually, what you're seeing of the plant is also an indication of what the roots and the health is like underneath the plant. So so, if you think about it, you've sort of got like a 1-to-1 ratio that the plant is almost about the same size as the roots, or at least the amount of space that the roots have to go.
yeah, you're right. And at this point, it has grown, and there is more above than there is below now.
Right,
It's
right.
probably doubled in size, but
It's been in
that
that.
makes sense because my conditions shouldn't be bad. They're not quite optimal. It's a little cold and a little dry, but not that bad. I mean, this is Western Oregon indoors.
Yeah. What I'd recommend is a larger pot, maybe like a 3-gallon pot, and equal parts perlite to potting soil.
Wait, what did that mean?
Oh,
Oh,
so
equal parts. Oh, I see.
yeah,
Gotcha.
so like, put like you know, one. Well, okay, cups is the wrong measurement, but let's just say for the sake of comparison, like 1 cup of perlite to 1 cup of potting mix. Um,
Perlite?
yeah, perlite is this white.
Yeah, I use it for mushrooms.
Right, right. Yeah, it's like what, based off of Formica or something? Like it's popped volcanic rock, or it's some natural product. It's I don't know how they make perlite actually, but yeah, so if you have like a 3-gallon pot, you'd want 1.5 of those gallons to be perlite, the other 1.5 gallons to be potting soil. Mix that all together, and then put your plant in there because it really likes aerated light soil.
Okay, yeah, and then you water it quite a bit.
I kind of wait for the soil to get a little bit dry between waterings, almost dry, because when the soil gets a little bit dry as well, that sends the plant a signal that it should be searching for water. So sometimes a little bit of dryness lets the roots know, hey, we need to grow further because we need to go out looking for water. It's like sending out scouts.
That makes sense. I think I'll do that. It would be nice. I mean, nice if it was more of a success. I mean, like, unlike what you do, I don't really plan on that becoming part of my deal, but I'd still want to know what I'm doing and know about, at
Yeah,
least as an amateur, understand that end of things. Plus,
right.
it would be good for me to learn about extraction, but it would also, if nothing else, be good to have fresh leaves to quib with. I've never done that before.
Oh, that's lovely. I
I tried it with dried leaves the other day, and it like just didn't work.
oh, um, how much did you quid?
I didn't measure it, but it was pretty much as I could fit, like kind of like behind my under my tongue and behind my lip comfortably. So it was like a nice big pinch.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that I've actually been working on recently. I've been making these quids where I have, do you know what lemon balm is?
No.
Lemon balm, it's a type of it's a plant and it tastes lemony and it's nice and it's tasty and it's edible. You can make really nice teas from it. Um, so it's just like a low a low-lying shrubby viney like plant that grows on the ground. It's a lot on the west coast here. Anyway, it's a nice edible plant, and you can make really nice teas out of it. I've been making lemon balm salvia quids.
Yeah.
And but the problem is, salvia itself, the dried and the fresh leaves, but it's really, really bitter. And so many people don't like quidding as well because they don't like the taste. So
Mhm.
I've been making these little quid packs where it's salvia infused onto lemon balm and then quidding with that. And so you get the lemon balm flavor, but you can also make it more concentrated. So you don't have to put a whole bunch of leaf material in your mouth.
Oh, so I mean, it's sort of a variation of extract,
It is, yeah.
but
It's a
it
very
is specifically for quitting rather than smoking.
exactly.
I've wondered about that. I thought after trying to quit, I was like, well, why don't I just use extract?
Well, the funny thing is quitting extract doesn't work.
Really?
Yeah, I've tried many times and many other people have tried as well, and it'll just waste it.
Really?
Uh, Yeah, but this formulation that I've come up with is it seems to be working quite well. So I've had two successful experiments with it so far. I'm just beginning to find the dosages that are working. But I'm actually kind of really excited about this because it might be another route of administration where you can have the same experience as quitting or using the tincture, but you don't have to shove like 20 grams of leaves in your mouth, or you don't have to use the alcohol tincture and burn your mouth.
Yeah, I've done the tincture a couple of times, and I just didn't like it. I
Yeah.
didn't even finish the bottle I had. I
Mm,
like the high, I like the experience, but
yeah.
the whole thing of having, by after 15 minutes, your whole mouth is full of saliva, and you
Right,
don't want
right.
to like swallow it, and you don't want to spit it out because that's the stuff that
It's all a
does the
good.
thing.
Yeah,
So, and then it's also the alcohol, at least at first, before it gets diluted, is really uncomfortable in your mouth.
burns like crazy, and it's hard to focus on the gentle unfolding of Mother Salvia when you're like, oh, my skin is burning off the inside of my lips.
Yeah, that's especially if I mean, I don't feel like I would really have that problem, but that's because I've smoked salvia so many times and I've got a good relationship with it.
Right, right.
But a lot of folks would prefer, I mean, in theory, the slow ramp would be great for newer folks, but not if you're dealing with like disgusting saliva and painful alcohol.
Yeah, exactly. Right, right. I mean, either way, when one quits, you kind of have to hold a bunch of saliva in your mouth for a while. I mean, there's much less saliva with quitting than with the alcohol tincture. Because the
Mhm.
alcohol tincture as well, I think makes one salivate even more.
That was my experience. I was like, this is gross.
Yeah, because I tried to do a quid with a little bit of mouthwash one time. I was like, maybe if I just use less leaf and add a little bit of mouthwash to it, um, the alcohol will kind of like extract some of the salvinorin out of the leaf, and then I'll have a stronger experience. And I noticed that I think it did make the experience a little bit stronger. But the mouthwash, because that's pretty astringent as well, even though I used a little bit, it just made me salivate so much, and there was just like green drool coming down my face, so it was just anyway, so I'm actually kind of stoked about this lemon balm custom formulation that I have going on. It might be a really nice route of administration for some people. So
So you've had success yourself with it?
yeah, I've had there was one particularly successful experience where um I mean, I've been working on it for a while because I've been playing with the dosages slowly over time because I was like, well, I don't know exactly like how strong to make this or not. Um and so and I've kind of been breaking it up over the course of like weeks because if I'm doing too many tests in a row, then my reverse tolerance might like kick up even more then. And then I'm not really going to get like an accurate measurement, right? Like I'm like, ooh, I've had a strong experience. Um, I've cracked the ratios, but it's just that I've gotten more sensitive. So I'd do an experiment and wait a week and then do another experiment and then wait a little while. And so just as of late, I've gotten to the sweet spot with my ratios where I had the lemon balm in my mouth, and it got to the point of maybe what would feel like smoking a light dose of the bowl. I got the folding feeling happening.
Hmm.
I got the quieting of the mind. Um, I got the salvia for me also, and for other people as well. Sometimes I don't know if it's the same thing for you. Makes one want to urinate a fair amount. Does it?
No,
Because it
that doesn't happen to me.
some people can act as a diuretic,
Huh.
and many people have noticed as well that with salvia, the urine becomes very, very clear.
Hmm.
Um, and so I'm not sure what's happening there in the body. It's quite interesting. But I've noticed that, with that quit experience as well, it's just like, yep, gotta go pee again. Um, but it was nice. It was sort of like maybe like those little pre-dosed capsules that I provide people when I do the guided sessions. It was maybe like half of one of those capsules, or it would maybe be like um the equivalent of like 10 milligrams of 10x. Um, so it was definitely enough for me to know I'm on the right path. And then the afterglow is really wonderful. And
And you can just add more extract, right?
yeah, you mean if I wanted to go deeper?
Well, what I mean is that for your experimentation, there's if you feel like you're still on the weak side compared to where you want to be,
Yeah, I could
uh,
just make it stronger.
you can just make it stronger. And so you're trying to dial it in, and that's where you are in the process right now.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm trying to dial it into where I feel like a good sweet spot is. And then also just going with consistency over time, just seeing that like, okay, every time I make a batch, is it kind of generally going to be the same? Um, so yeah, so that's one thing that I was like, when it's kind of interesting when one's doing some sort of alchemy, chemistry things, kind of trying things out on the fly. Almost like a chef, when like a chef like makes up a new recipe and they're like, Mamma mia, this is amazing. It was kind of like that same feeling. I was like sitting there with the lemon balm in my mouth thinking, wow, this is really pleasant. I hope this works. At least as far as like the taste is concerned and stuff. And then, I felt that salvia feeling coming on. I was like, yes, it's working.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that,
That's really exciting. I am excited. Well, I mean, I don't know what you want to use it for, but you know, to me, it sounds like it's a lot of potential, and you might want to look into patenting the process. And um,
right.
yeah, because I'd be interested in using it myself. Down the
Yeah.
road too, you're using lemon balm, but you could have potentially a whole line where you use like lavender,
All those things. Yeah, exactly.
CBD,
Yep.
or
Yep. I went with lemon balm actually because I was gonna go with mint initially. And we have a lot of mint growing in our garden, but it was the winter season, and so I went to the garden and like there was no more mint. And I was like, so then I came inside and I already had some dried lemon balm. And I was like, oh, let me try lemon balm. And so it doesn't have to be lemon balm, it could even be a blend of like mint and lemon balm and
yeah.
lavender. Um, so yeah, that's something that I think is quite exciting.
Yeah, that sounds really neat.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny because I don't get the impression that you're like, have an engineering background, but like this will be your, if successful, this will be your second major salvia invention.
Right. I know. Well, it's funny. When I was a kid, I either knew I wanted to be a mad scientist was one of the things, or an inventor was another one. And also, funnily enough, and I don't even know where this came from, but a medicine man,
Yeah,
which is, yeah, I remember I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, and I met this friend of the family, and he did like a past life regression with me when I was 6 or 7. And he said, he was essentially, I had to, like, there were these like crystals in front of me, and I had to, pick up the choose a crystal which called to me, and then I had to put all my awareness, my energy into this crystal. And I'm not a very crystally person, generally speaking. I don't have like crystals. I have one crystal that I like, which is meaningful personally to me. But I'm not a crystal person, generally speaking. And but I have nothing against them. But anyway, he like had me like ask this crystal, like just think into it, what I was in a previous lifetime. And the term, and I said medicine man. And and then I kind of like forgot about it, and it was I hadn't really thought about that in a really long time. And then I got married this past year, and my sister was giving a wedding speech, and she was saying just how it's kind of funny that she remembers me being a child saying I wanted to be an inventor and a medicine man when I grow up. And she was like, and you're kind of doing work with the medicine right now, and you've invented some things. And so I was like, oh, wow, that really did come full circle. But if someone were to say to me now, like, are you a medicine man? I wouldn't say yes. I don't know. I don't think I'd call myself a medicine man, same way I wouldn't really call myself a shaman or something like that. Um, but working with medicine, yeah. And I think that's just something I enjoy about the creative process, and you're a pretty creative person as well, and you like writing things and making music and designing things, and so it's just a fun thing to do.
Yeah, totally. I know what you mean. I certainly don't call myself a shaman, although, technically the idea that a white person shouldn't call themselves a shaman isn't quite fair because uh, we have shaman in our lineage too. You
Mhm.
just have to go further back, you know, or also I've been reading a lot of the history and culture of psychedelics
Mm,
uh, in the last year or so as I started to identify myself more with the culture and politics and religion around psychedelics.
mm, mm,
So I've done quite a bit of research around that, and like the idea that plant plant medicine being part of our spiritual lives, it being a uniquely new world, just isn't true.
yeah, right.
It is true that in the old world, we just didn't have. There's actually sociologists that are like, well, why isn't it even more in the the old world?
Mm,
But the answer is not complicated. We just our stash isn't as good. Right? That's the biggest thing. I mean, if your options are like Amita Muscara and Datura, you're not,
right, right.
and then also we've had more oppression from puritanical um, philosophies.
Yeah.
Uh, but the idea of having shamans or medicine men and using these medicines for various purposes of spirituality and culture, community development,
Mm,
and
mm,
therapy. Humans have been doing that all over the world for thousands of years, and
right.
that is really what it comes down to. But that having been said, it's a little bit odd in this particular cultural framework for a white European Westerner to say that they're a shaman or a medicine man. Just sort of doesn't come off well.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, like, I don't know, shamans are they also not like trained from a very, very young age with a long, long apprenticeship, and it's also more in a communally agreed upon setting where it is known that this person is in training to become a shaman. Yeah, I don't know what the bodying rules are or laws for, what can make someone truly be considered a shaman. Um, I mean, in my case, I would say, a lot of my knowledge has come from just my first direct hand experience with working with salvia for a very long time. And then, I incorporate the somatic psychotherapy aspect into things. Um, and that's the based on the Hakomi method. But even the Hakomi method is a blend of multiple different things. It's a blend of body work, it's a blend of Taoism, it's a blend of Buddhism. You know, the guy who came up with the Hakomi method, Ron Kurtz, he even says in his book on body-centered psychotherapy that, you know, he was like, the Hakomi method is a blend of many different modalities and methods that have all been kind of brought together. And so, but still, so you know, my first-hand experience with Salvia, then working with many people, guiding them on Salvia sessions has also informed me quite a lot. And then the somatic psychotherapy side of things. But I wouldn't say all those three things is, you know, constitutes the same rite of passage that maybe a shaman might have to go through to be considered that. I don't know.
Yeah, and if that's not an identity that calls to you, then you don't take
Yeah,
it home.
right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. As well as like, does it resonate with me personally? I'm just like, no. I just think of more of myself as a teacher and a guide.
Yeah,
More.
I remember you telling me that before. I think we talked about this a little bit before. You know, from a, uh, I've got quite a bit of background in like religion, basically, including
Mm,
Christianity,
mm,
especially Christianity, I suppose. Although
mm.
I've always been a sort of insider outsider in in
How
in
did
Christian
how did
circles.
you how do you get that background, or is it something you studied, or just something that you've been deeply interested in?
It is actually more like I haven't been interested, but it is just so around me that I've studied it around. When I was growing up, my dad, well, both my parents are science-oriented mathematicians.
Mm,
Uh, my dad is also a devout Catholic, but my mom is a kind of atheist-leaning agnostic,
mm,
a very secular.
mm,
And when I was growing up, it was basically, I was living, 6.5 days a week. I was living the very secular West Coast atheist leaning life, except that I was going to church every Sunday morning.
mm, mm,
And I look back at that now and think of it as very formative because I
mm.
wasn't fully integrated. I wasn't fully, what's the word? Initiated really into either being really Catholic. Although I mean, I went to church and did Sunday school and did all the sacraments, but I
Mm,
wasn't really an initiated Catholic. My friends weren't Catholic, but then
mm.
I wasn't exactly a fully initiated secular person either because I was going to church every week.
Right,
And
right.
so that tension was thrown in my face. I didn't have any choice but to deal with it. And so as soon as I was old enough to start contemplating it, elementary school, and
Mm,
certainly middle school, I immediately started trying to deal with the contradictions that were being thrust upon me.
right.
And I didn't know this word until 10 years later. But now I look back at it and think I was already flirting with mysticism
Mm,
in middle school.
mm,
And
mm.
I had a secret spiritual. I think I'm the only person I know like this. That I was obsessively religious and obsessively spiritual, starting at about age 12, but I didn't come out as believing in God till I was like 17 or 18.
Okay.
Like I was I would like pray all the time. But I had this like I thought that I was sort of, and I see psychonauts and like younger spiritual people, younger, not necessarily in age, but in spiritual experience.
Mm,
Uh, they always they that something opens up, their world changes, and then they take themselves way too seriously and think of themselves as being this prophet, which is exactly how I was back when I was 12.
oh,
Um,
okay.
I see it all the time.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, oh, it's all about me, I'm a prophet, but people, when they have this opening, and I don't know if this resonates with you, but that's okay. Um, they'll go through a phase of a few months
Mm,
of, and they lose their grounding, kind of. They are. sort of like seeing fairies and leprechauns,
Mm,
behind every tree.
mm,
And it's really neat to watch, because I mean, I actually, in the last 3 months, I think I've met two people who are like in their 50s or 60s, and it was like, I was an angry materialist atheist until a month ago, and then everything just changed. And
wow.
now I'm having all these psychic experiences, and I'm reading about the Akashic record. In one case, is I changed my gender. Uh,
Wow.
and
Mm,
then what I'm thinking, and I know, people are attracted to talking to me about these things. It's always been this way. I don't really know why, but I accept it.
mm,
And and I already know, I'm like, well, okay, this part's gonna last a few weeks. It's really fun. Have a great time. Then you're like, it's gonna slow down. I already know because it always does. It slows down. Your life remains completely different than it was before. But
mm,
I'm living amongst the rainbows
mm,
thing all day. It only lasts a few months, and then you kind of come back down and you start questioning whether it was real or not,
mm,
but
mm.
there's no going back. And it's just the story anyway. For me, I went through that more like in middle school. uh
Wow. Yeah.
I
You
don't
got
remember when I started telling the story, but it's a fun but it's a fun story. And then I didn't get into plant medicine until I was a teenager. Oh, I remember. It was because I was telling you about like how my identity. I definitely don't identify as a shaman. I don't
mm,
identify as a therapist. In fact, I sort of push away from that because there's so much momentum in psychedelics to go that route.
right.
Uh, so I identify as a psychedelic minister,
Mm, mm,
but it's and I am, taking steps towards cultivating that as my profession. I
mm,
think of my YouTube channel as at this stage as sort of my ministry,
mm,
and
mm.
so this is my voice, my voice to the world, and I try
Right.
to take it seriously that way. Although I haven't been making very much material lately, and then I've got a couple different organizations that I'm involved in the
Mm, mm.
creation of that take my ministry to the next level. But for
Yeah.
for me, because also I have a master's degree in theology, and I
Oh,
flirted with
oh, by the way, and then that you just tack that on at the end
yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. And, I,
there.
and I've worked.
Not to minor detail, but it does sound like what was more informative for you were those early experiences when you were 12, and your personal experience, and I think that really highlights the point with what we go through personally versus what we learn about from an outside source really just lands so much more differently for us. So it was much more informative for you to have gone through those experiences when you were 12. And um
Yeah.
I'm curious as well, like, when you were younger and you were praying all the time, like, do you remember what sort of things you'd be praying for?
Um.
What did your prayer look like?
Uh. There. Um. At first, it was very scientific.
Mm,
I unfortunately scientific in attitude, but not really methodology. I
right,
should have been writing stuff down because
right.
I actually can remember when I was about 12, I said, I am going to test this idea. It occurred to me
Mm,
that if God, the way I had learned about God in church, was real, well, then he's big enough, he's with me all of the time. And this doesn't have to be this detached theoretical, theory.
yeah.
The way that most like philosophers deal with does God exist, it doesn't have to be that way. You can just ask. And if God doesn't say anything, then God doesn't exist.
Mm,
Right?
mm,
It doesn't, it doesn't have to be so theoretical.
right.
And so I created an experiment for myself. I think I said, like, for about 1 week, I'm just going to believe in God and live as though God exists,
Uh-huh.
which means, I mean, really, I should be praying all the time because that's a direct, everything else is just detail. So that's what I started doing.
Mhm.
And I did pray like for specific things, and I think that they were very 12-year-oldy. You know, they were like a toy that I wanted to get for my birthday,
Yeah.
and then I got it.
Oh, hey, there you go. And if you think
uh,
about it, I think what a 12-year-old prays for is probably like still the important things in life. If one thinks about it, you like actually reflect on what they pray for. You know, it's probably things like things that can add play and fun to their life, and you know, really like the juicy, innocently hedonistic things everyone wants from life. Uh,
yeah. Although you're also very insecure and you know, getting into your teenage years, and so you're
that's
insecure and obsessed with outside
right.
standards,
That's
and
right.
probably even worse at navigating those than you are when you're older.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, anyway, so to my surprise, I don't actually remember really what the prayers were or what it was that was happening. But I mean, when you live as though the divine is real, what happens to people is that the divine becomes real, though.
Mhm.
Because it's, well, now philosophically I would say, I didn't know that then, but now I say, well, spirituality is hyper subjective. It isn't an objective, it isn't an objective piece of data out there that is
Mhm.
either true or false. It is a matter
Mhm.
of interpreting your life, and you can interpret it through a secular
Mhm.
lens, or a more sacred lens. And there isn't a piece of data out there that is going to say that one is right or wrong, because it's
Mhm.
so
I mean,
subjective. That's what
and
I believe now.
yeah, and I don't think it's a fixed thing either. You know, our spirituality changes and grows and is dynamic. I think we can think about our spirituality as a living being that we interact with and interact with us, not an external living being, but living as far as the fact that it changes and grows depending on where we are in our own world and where we are in our own life. And I think when people's spirituality becomes kind of fixed and stuck and dogmatic and non-changing and no longer updating as well to incorporate new beliefs from their experiences in life and their worldviews. Um, I think maybe that's when spirituality can sort of hold one back.
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's not like some data point or some fixed external thing. It is a dynamic system within which we're living.
Yeah. 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 And that's how it should be. Right.
Mm,
One thing is, I'm reading a book right now about the history of psychedelic churches.
mm.
And there's a lot of patterns, including including the leaders all going to jail. That happens a lot. uh, but also one thing that makes like the government struggle with, like, is this really a religion? The thing is that they don't know that there's a rich history of this stuff. They don't know we've been doing this for thousands of years. They just
Yeah,
think we're
they look more
stoners.
they look more at the legal definition as well of I was watching a lawyer give a talk recently on you know, setting up a church essentially and what you need to have as your mission statement and what you need to be showing that you're doing in order to legally be considered a church. Um, so, you know, as far as the law is concerned, they're like, oh, well, religion equals when these conditions are met.
Yep,
Yeah.
there's specific. I think it is the IRS, for the sake of taxes, has a 14 point, and you literally need like 9 out of the 14 of these characteristics. But
Yeah.
they are built by like people at the IRS. They don't have minister. They don't have
Yeah. No, none of the points,
sociologists,
right,
creating these things. And
right.
so they are
None of the
very
points
in
have
the
any.
box Christian, you know, they are very Christocentric, basically, and very Protestant. And in fact, like there's a lot of emphasis on, well, what are your beliefs? But when you look at the history of psychonaut churches,
Mm,
one pattern that most of them have is that they are actually almost dogmatically against dogma.
Right.
And they are very much like, we are just cultivating your ability to develop your own belief system, but you
Yeah.
shouldn't be stuck in your own belief system. And we're not going to shove one down your throat because
Mhm.
we are against that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what's interesting is that this is a pattern that psychonauts, and I think that mystics in general have,
Mm.
but people who aren't on that train, they think they don't, that isn't what they think of as what is religion.
Mm. Yeah. Well, because as well, I think many people go to religion because they're looking for guidance, and within that framework of looking for guidance, they're wanting to be told what to do, um, but not in like a domineering way. Um, but I think many people can be searching for more directive help, and I think some people, it seems um, quite overwhelming or a big burden to be told, oh, well, you kind of need to figure it out yourself and come to the light yourself. And some people are like, no, but I need help. So there's a way in which one can like be supportive of someone finding their own path and finding their own answers, but also while still being directive and helpful and providing guidance. Um, which I think is, would you not say what ministering is? If like, because I think, there's a way in which one can minister, and it's not just, reciting the scriptures or laying out the law, the rules that have to be followed. Um, I think isn't a good minister someone that's also compassionate and empathetic and understanding and supportive and um,
Yeah.
mm,
That's definitely how I see it. It's um, a little bit philosopher and performer. You hopefully the people who are coming to you, they probably don't have quite as much book knowledge about philosophy and religion
mm,
or
mm,
psychedelics as you.
mm, mm.
Um, and so you've got to be kind of you don't have to be super scholarly, but you should be relatively well read, at least to the point where you can follow what other people are talking about.
Right, right. You don't just sit there with like a blank look on your face, like what?
Yeah. And
Uh,
it's like a little bit therapist because the line between what is ministry and what is therapy is a little bit wishy-washy.
yeah.
Uh, but as I said, I definitely don't identify as a therapist. And a lot when people come to me, and this isn't formal at this point, I'm making it formal, but
Mm,
um, but it tends to be informal. People come to me, and mostly it's not, they don't want to hear my voice, they want to hear their voice.
mm,
And for some reason, well, a lot of people have psychedelic experiences or spiritual experiences outside the realm of psychedelics, and they're dealing with such esoteric things that they're
mm,
uncomfortable talking about it.
mm,
And so just being a, I honestly get bored. To tell you the truth, I honestly get bored, but I understand that people need my presence so that they can talk about their aliens.
mm, mm.
And they oftentimes think that they're blowing my mind. They're like, "You're not going to believe this. Aliens are real." And what they don't know is that I've heard this a million times, but that's okay. They
Yeah.
need my face and they need me to be positive. And the truth
Mm,
is, I kind of don't care about their aliens, but I do care about them, you
mhm,
know?
mhm,
And so oftentimes when I'm in that mode, it is mostly just a lot of listening. And I'm not even trying. I'll give some guidance or give some ideas when it comes up. But I also, like I said, I'm not a therapist, so I'm not trying to fix people's. It's not my job to fix their problems.
right. Yeah.
Mostly it's just having a presence. And when they talk about this or they talk about that, I've got enough null. I've got an openness that I can be present with them without judging them, and I've got enough book knowledge that I can reflect back a little bit of of knowledge that might be helpful.
Right.
And when I'm in a session like that, that's pretty much what I do.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's also oftentimes so much. it's not the story itself, but it was how is the person embodying that story? How are they, not just, one is when they're telling you about it, how are they presenting the information? How are they showing up in their body? But then also, what sort of relational component did they feel like they were engaging with the alien or entities or the colors or something like that? Because sometimes people will tell a story and they'll just present it as if they were looking at it in a screensaver. And then there's not much information there. But then sometimes they'll tell the same story of what they were seeing, but there was more of a felt physical connection with the visuals or the messages that were coming through. And so it's the same thing with somatic therapy as well. The story is sort of only like the surface level, but then there's like the deeper structure that lives underneath that. And what is actually being communicated behind the story? What is the deeper message? It's sort of there's how you say something carries more weight than what is said. You know, so if just listening to the intonation, the pitch, how they're expressing the ideas, does it bring aliveness in them? Or when they're telling the same story, does it bring a sense of like detachment or a sense of fear? Sometimes someone will tell a story, and as they're telling the story, just all the energy like leaves their body and they just get like super tired, and you just see the energy being drained as they're telling the story. And so that's kind of what one can key into that as well. It's just like, okay, how is this person presenting themselves as they're relaying the story? And that is where more information can be gotten aside from just what's happening on the surface level of the story. Because many times, many of the stories are the same, like this happened and this happened and then this happened, and then this was said, and then that's the finality. There's a definite arc and a way which stories are relayed. Um, but I find if one, um, you know, so it's also an invitation. I think if one finds oneself being bored while listening to these stories, you know, then simultaneously that can help us drop into our own seat and think, okay, like, okay, I realize I'm feeling bored by hearing this story. Um, And then what does that do to one as well? Because when one feels bored by hearing a story, then one thinks like, yeah, 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 I've heard this all before. And then one can miss some of the details. And so um, it's that, and I think that's where, good guidance comes from with like psychedelic guides, is the guides who can not feel like they're guiding you, but rather that they're with you while remaining in their own seat while going through the experience with one.
Hmm.
Um, So it's more of a relational, co-created experience than it is like, oh, I am the guide bestowing my experience on you, or lecturing you. I think that's there's a big problem with the um, common analytical psychodynamic approach as well, where it's like the psychoanalyst knows what's better and the client doesn't know, and the psychoanalyst has to tell them what's wrong, then analyze and diagnose them. And it, inherently creates a sense of power imbalance, and there becomes like an authoritative figure. And, you know, someone might want to be told what to do, but also I think on a more subconscious level, we can tell if someone feels as if they're being authoritative over us, even if it's happening subconsciously for both people. And I think that can sometimes be an impediment to growth and healing because the body puts up resistance towards this other person.
Yeah, the
And
higher.
yeah, because on the surface, it looks like everything's hunky dory. Like, oh yeah, I went to you because I don't feel well and I want you to tell me what's wrong. And then the person says, well, this is what's wrong with you. And then logically, you're like, okay, this makes sense. But then on a much more deeper somatic level, there's there's this experience that the person has of like, oh well, I just don't feel more like deeply understood or deeply seen by this other person. So I think it was Peter Levine and many other people as well talk about the power that empathetic witnessing has for transformational healing. So just being with someone who you can tell is genuinely empathetically witnessing your hurt or your pain or what you're going through, and just the the experience of being empathetically witnessed is much more healing than the experience of someone just saying all the right things.
I see. And this is a conversation in therapy circles because when one person's a therapist who's got some letters behind their name and they're making money, and the other person is giving money, the hierarchies aren't there. And then, but then if, and that's okay, but that hierarchical structure can actually become a hindrance to the healing that ultimately both people, but particularly the client, want to
Yeah.
experience.
And I think that that's very common. And I think that's something that can be discussed with one's therapist. And I think it's quite common, for clients to say to the therapist, or at least think at one point, like, oh, this person's only talking to me, because I'm paying them. And can I really believe or trust what they're saying? Because, would they be this nice to me if I weren't paying them? Or would they be saying these helpful things for me if I weren't paying them? And that there is something that can actually be explored in and of itself, because that means that that person might have some beliefs around receiving value or help from others does become less valued if it is transactional in nature. Because you can think everything's transactional in nature, even if there's no money involved, there's time involved, there's energy involved. So do they take that belief that this person is only helping them, or there's a power differential because there's payment involved? Where do they take that other belief and kind of project it into other areas of their life as well? So I kind of think like everything is an opportunity to get curious and study our own reactions about things. Um, study our reactions to our clients, study the clients' reactions to things, to themselves, to the world around them. Um, and then that can be sort of like the in to like, okay, well, let's name what's here and let's explore what's there. Um, so it's a very, and this is where I think Salvia is so helpful and great as well, because especially at the lighter doses, Salvia does such a good job of dropping people into the present moment that a lot of those stories kind of seem to vanish. Or one can get a sense of objective distance from that belief that one has. And so it gives you the opportunity to, you know, remain engaged with the body while you continue to objectively look at your own things. And so sometimes all we need is that little bit of objective distance and a little bit of space to be able to observe it.
And salvia helps so much with that. What you were saying about the salvia in particular, what shutting down or whatever, modulating the
Mm,
default mode network,
mm,
uh, really makes sense to me a lot.
yeah.
I use a lot of different medicines, um, but the one that tears apart the ego the fastest at the lowest doses is salvia.
Yeah.
You hardly, especially if you know what you're doing, meaning you've done it, whatever. This sounds so egotistical if you know what you're doing. But if you know what you're doing, it doesn't take very much at all to be able to create that distance
Yeah.
and see your life radically in a different way.
Right.
Uh, and people, though, the obvious comparison, and you hear this a lot, is I've had people like I've had drunk people at parties get in my
Mm.
face and say, well, why do you use salvia instead of DMT? Salvia is evil and DMT is good.
Right,
And
right.
I'm okay with DMT. I smoke DMT sometimes,
Mm.
but I always feel like with DMT, I mean, it does go deep. I've had some pretty amazing experiences on DMT, but I always call it, I called salvia a scalpel. Like it's a It doesn't even take very much to be able to go deep into your psyche and do deep work from that position.
Yeah.
And comparatively, DMT it'll give you amazing experiences. And if you're looking for angels and demons,
Mm.
DMT will give you those experiences. But
Yeah.
I find that with most other psychedelics, I need a pretty high dose for it to give me the kind of for it to reach underneath the ego.
Mm. Mm.
Usually I'm still me experiencing this and experiencing that.
Mm. Mhm. Mm. Yeah. 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 It's and I like that, you mentioned that you don't have to have very much or you don't have to go very deep with salvia. This the precise nature with which salvia can work, I think is really quite wonderful, because then one can, with practice over time, kind of begin to harness that precision and send it and direct it to specific places in the body. Um, and I think as well, just sometimes recognizing that, yeah, it's true. One doesn't need that much distance from one's problems in order to feel like you're getting a break from them. Um, and many times I think, what I've seen with a lot of people that I work with is they get the message from Salvia that, the healing doesn't have to be so much of a struggle. You don't have to be trying so hard. It doesn't have to be like gnashing of teeth and clawing your way through healing to get to some other side. You don't have to be battling with the angels and demons. Sometimes Salvia is just like, okay, let's just fix this over here. And people are like, wow, that was surprisingly quick and effective. And I feel better. And as well, with Salvia, there's often less of a story associated with why one feels better. With ayahuasca, for example, there's lots of stories where, like, Mother Ayahuasca or something like that will come in, and with DMT as well, like the aliens are around you doing the surgery and stuff like that. Um, but with salvia, I hear the refrain more with salvia compared to other medicines, where they say like, I'm not exactly sure what happened. I know something happened, but I'm just feeling better. Like, and salvia is sometimes like, yeah, you know, you don't need a reason to feel better. Why don't you can just feel better and just live from this place. And I think so much of it is because it brings us to the present moment. And so there's no reason for the present moment other than it just is. So there's this isness, there's this just isness that can happen with salvia. And I think part of that just isness that comes up is one can just feel more grounded and just feel happier and just feel more connected to oneself, um, without needing to have come to some sort of, big revelatory insight. It's not as if you need to go back and understand everything that happened to you in the past in order to actually just fully be with yourself in a supported, full manner in the present moment.
Yeah. I hear you. I agree with, though my language is a little different, but we're pointing at the same thing. I was thinking
Mm,
in terms of interpretation.
mm,
Um, you see a problem, you say, "Oh, well, I interpret this as bad." Well, it doesn't take a whole lot of processing. It is just a snap. If you're interpreting a situation, the situation itself is never inherently good or bad. It's the person who is interpreting it.
mhm.
And the mind has the ability to just
Their
push the button
interpretation, their
and go
interpretation,
from negative to positive interpretation. And you don't need uh, a complicated process to do that. You just need a little bit of distance and the will to decide to do it.
right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and I jumped in for a second because I was going to clarify. You said that it's not the problem that's bad; it's the person doing the interpretation. But I wanted to clarify it's the interpretation that is
Oh,
the
I'm sorry.
not the
No, no,
person.
no, not the
I
person
knew
doing it.
I knew that's what you meant, but I was like, wait, if someone hears that and thinks because they misinterpreted something that they're bad, that's not the case.
Yeah. In fact, even the interpretation, it's a negative interpretation, technically speaking, isn't negative itself. It's just that the content happens to be negative.
Yeah,
If
Yeah,
you don't like the taste of onions, there is nothing wrong with not liking the taste of onions. The mind does have the ability to change its mind, but it
right,
doesn't have to.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sometimes the reaction to the experience can be worse than the experience itself.
Yeah.
Mm, mm, mm. Um, and also, I think many times people are hard on themselves for having negative reactions to experiences, but sometimes shitty things happen. And it's kind of normal and natural to have a negative reaction against it. Um, so I think as well, part of it is how long do we then hold on to the initial reaction that happened? We can have something negative that happens and we rightfully so have a negative reaction to it. But then does that create the imprint that we then keep going back to? Our reactivity to something, even in the past, can change over time.
Yeah. Yeah. You can sort of almost, I mean, if you want to get magical about it, it's like you're going into the past and changing your past.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
theoretically not the past itself that's changing, but it's your interpretation. But that's okay because it's your interpretation, your story around it that is affecting your life today anyway.
And that's another thing that salvia can actually be really helpful for, because with salvia there can be this time can become a little bit all existing at the same time, like past, present, and future kind of can be the same thing. For anyone who's explored salvia, they know that it can do some funny things with time. And to that point, one thing that's helpful with salvia is at the low to mid doses is you're meditating with salvia, and because the confines of time become a little bit more loosey-goosey with salvia, you can reimagine an event that happened to you in the past and reimagine it. And this is like the magical thinking way, in a way, or manifesting way. You can reimagine it happening differently. And it's an interesting experiment to do that on salvia.
That's a good idea. I can see that.
Yeah. So either reimagining things that happened to you in the past, or using salvia to imagine and manifest how you want yourself or things to be in the future. So it's and that's not to say that, it's always going to come to fruition, or it's always going to come true. Um, but one can do some pretty interesting time experiments with salvia when it comes to manifesting and positive affirmations and things one believes about oneself, or um, how one wants to. And I think it's less about imagining how you want things to happen in the future, and it's more about imagining how you want to be in the future when certain things happen. So
Hmm.
it's getting back to that reactionary conversation that we were just having. Um, because I don't think you could sit there and say like, okay, well, I'm going to imagine X, Y, and Z happening in this concrete manner, because that would be a lot of variables to take into account. But imagining how one wants to be, or who one wants to be, or how one wants to show up,
Yeah.
or what one wants to feel like in an embodied state in certain experiences in the future. Um, for some people, it might be being able to feel more courageous during challenging conversations with others. Or, some people are very conflict avoidant, and they're very conflict avoidant because um, with conflict avoidance also comes oftentimes putting one's own needs on the back burner and not being able to put up clear boundaries as well. So, one can think like, okay, well, meditating with salvia, when this situation comes up again, feel into how one can feel connected and grounded to oneself and comfortable enough to be able to bring up topics that might feel like they cause a little bit of conflict. So, essentially imagining oneself to have maybe greater emotional capacity with certain events that will likely happen again in the future,
Hmm.
or a very specific event in the future. Let's say you have something in your life that's coming up, and you think like, oh man, there's this situation that's going to come up again, and every time situations like this come up, this is how I react.
Yeah.
So then you can be meditating with salvia, think of that situation that's going to be coming up, and just from an embodied sense, imagining how one would actually like to be. And it's quite interesting.
I find this fascinating. I'm glad you brought it up because I've thought about it in the general sense of you should de-emphasize what's going to happen or even what you're going to do and instead put more emphasis on who you are. I've
Right,
read this and I've thought about it and I've worked on it myself, and I'm a big believer that it's more about who you are than what you're going to do or what's going to happen.
right, right,
And that ultimately you'll be happier with your life if you put more emphasis on who you are, you know.
right.
Um,
More of a how you are versus like what you do.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And we even look, we have archetypal example, like a martyr is
Mm.
somebody who's an extreme case where
Mm.
they put their emphasis on who they were or how they showed up to a situation rather than the outcome, because the outcome for them personally was very bad, right? That's why we look up to people, archetypes like that.
Yeah.
It had never occurred to me though to do specific work with specific situations like what you're talking about, and that seems really smart. You know, I
Right.
had a recent experience. I've always been a very bad test taker. I
Mm.
freak out, and
Mm.
in fact, when I was in college, I was a music major for 4 years, but I was a very low tier music major. I was kind of barely making it, and
Mhm.
then I had an audition uh, at the end of term that was important. If I was going to go keep on going forward, I had to do well on this audition. And I was
Mm.
so nervous that I completely collapsed. I could hardly play my instrument. And I
Mm.
ended up changing my major. And it's, now it's okay. But it was a really big deal.
Yeah.
And I've had that happen throughout my life where when I'm being evaluated, I tend to not show up with my best.
Mm.
So this was just a couple of weeks ago. I studied karate and I was doing a belt test.
Mm.
And they make it a big deal. It's a great school, and they make it a big deal. But I could feel my nerves, and me being all new agey and stuff. I'm like, okay, well, I meditate, and I'm picturing myself doing a good job. I'm picturing myself remembering my forms and everything. And I'm
Yeah.
sitting here, and I'm like doing the things that I think I'm supposed to do. Oh, don't forget to breathe. And
Mm.
but then it occurred. It just snapped. It occurred to me
Mm.
everything that I'm doing to fix my problem with nerves aren't
Mm.
solutions, they are manifestations of the problem. So when I
Mm.
remind myself to breathe deeply, I'm not solving my nervousness, I'm manifesting my nervousness. It's just when you're a new agey guy, that's what you do when you're nervous, which is exactly what I did 20 years ago to fuck up that audition. And
Right.
so I stopped and I said, I'm just stopping all of that shit right here. I was waiting for my turn to be tested. And I said, I'm stopping all that shit. I already practiced my shit. I
Right.
already know my moves. Forget
Right.
all that stuff. I'm not
Mm.
going to worry about my breathing. I'm not going to picture myself doing a good job. No more of that crap. I'm not going
Right.
to check in on my fifth chakra. And then
Yeah.
and it solved the problem.
Wow. That's great. Yeah. Yeah. You because in a sense, like one, that's awesome. I'm really liking to hear this. Congratulations and good job on coming to that. Kind of like by dropping everything, you were just, it also gave you a sense of faith in yourself. You're like, I've got it. I'm good. I know what I'm doing. I practiced. It's in my muscle memory. Um, there was this trust and this faith that came up, and it's almost as if the mental preparation things that you're doing beforehand um was sort of like, oh, like I hope this works, like wishful thinking. If I believe it hard enough, then maybe it might come to fruition. So it was funnily enough for you introducing some doubt into the equation.
I totally think that you're right. Totally. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
always think you mentioned like faith and confidence. Something that I've come to is that in the secular world, we tend to think a lot about self-confidence. Like in therapy, they'll talk a lot about you got to believe in yourself and know that you're able to do this. Whereas in religious circles, especially like dualistic kinds of anthropomorphic kinds of religions, there's faith in the God.
Mm.
Uh, and so they look on the surface to be completely different. One is secular, one is religious, right? But I really think that it is more deeply seated than that, that it isn't the object of the faith that actually matters. It is simply the emotional state of having the faith, right?
Mm.
It is
Yeah,
like the faith slash confidence itself that works the power. And it doesn't matter whether you call it self confidence or faith in Jesus. It is
right.
the emotional state itself that can help you function better as an individual.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And um, well, I mean that just goes into like the magic of placebo as well, for example. Like the fact that placebo effect does anything is pretty magical if you think about it.
Yeah.
Mm. But yeah, like to this point, I'm personally not much of a positive affirmations type of person. Like if I am getting ready to do something in the future, I don't generally like sit there and visualize it going well, so on and so forth. Um, because I think at a certain level, to what you were saying, it gets caught up in that same way of thinking, like you were noticing with the karate. Um, so it's a kind of interesting that even though I'm not much of a positive affirmations type of person, I find that when I'm on a light dose of salvia and I'm doing visualization exercises or a positive affirmation or something like that, salvia really seems to bypass the subconscious critical side of myself that might not believe and that might get in its own way. And so I find that with the salvia, I'll think about some positive thing or some positive potential future outcome about how I might want to be. And if I were to do that without the salvia, there'd be some part of me that's like, yeah, right, you don't really believe that.
Mm.
Um, but with salvia, it's just like it bypasses that. And it just, because it seems as if the thoughts are coming more from my body and deeper from within my psyche than the thoughts coming from my mind. I find like the origination point of one's thinking can feel quite different with salvia as well. Like if I'm sitting here thinking, it feels like thoughts are coming from my brain. But with salvia, when I meditate and I think, it feels as if the thoughts and the ideas are coming more from my body, or maybe sometimes from outside of my body. And so I think this it lets us get into a different dialogue or flow of communication with ourselves, where we're not going to um, block ourselves. It's almost as if a thought comes from the mind, there's also the strong potential that the mind can block it because it's originating from there. But if the thought is coming from elsewhere in our being, it has more of a chance of actually resonating with us and being believed
Mm.
if it's something that we know to be true as well. So, as well, Salvia is very good at detecting BS. So, I think many people they're unable to bullshit themselves while they're on Salvia. And so this inability to bullshit oneself while on Salvia also inherently forces one to then um, think and act and come from a more authentic, truthful place from within. and and then the body's going to believe that because it knows that it's coming from a more authentic place versus coming from a place that might exist because it was born in the mind out of fear or social conditioning.
I like that. I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
I think psychedelics in general, though, have that effect. They tend to show you the truth and not give you a choice.
Right.
They're all
Yeah.
different. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Um,
And then where the integration work comes into play is then actually putting that truth to the test in real life and see if it holds up.
yeah.
Because sometimes, and this can be the tricky part with psychedelics as well. Sometimes we get presented with something that seems like a brilliant, amazing idea or some ultimate truth. Um, but then you find it doesn't really quite hold up when you try apply it to life. Or it might not be that great of an idea. Um, and so I think people who don't do the engaged, focused work that integration actually calls for, um, can more easily begin to believe things that might not necessarily be true, but they felt very true while they were on the psychedelics. And so, that's where the rubber meets the road. You dip into the psychedelic space, you get some guidance, you get some ideas, you get some wisdom, but then you're like, okay, well, let's see how it actually holds up to reality.
I think that's important because you
Yeah,
in psychedelic circles, you do hear a lot of weird quackery stuff. I mean, people have the right to believe whatever they want. I don't want, to be a fundamentalist about my metaphysical views, but
sure.
people there are within the mind, there are a lot of roads, and a lot of them end up getting pretty tinfoil hatty.
Yeah, they can. Right, right. Yeah, and then I mean there would be much less tinfoil hatty things if these like some out there ideas were actually tried to be implemented. And then, but then one has to realize, and this is almost where being humble comes into account as well, where one needs to like humble and adaptable. One needs to be able to recognize, oh, you know what, that idea that I got on psychedelics might not actually be the right idea. And so maybe I was wrong.
Yeah.
So, and that's where the autonomy comes into place. And actually, it's much more self-empowering to be able to question one's own beliefs, even if they came up with salvia, DMT, ayahuasca, MDMA, ibogaine, whatever it is. Um, I noticed like for me, ketamine is one that can give me, while I'm in the ketamine state, I can have some pretty grandiose ideas. And I noticed ketamine does that for me more than other things.
Me too.
Uh, yeah, and so, but if I were to not do any integration work and only keep doing ketamine over and over again, I'd keep getting grandiose ideas, grandiose ideas. But if I didn't put any of those ideas to the test, and then sometimes they fall apart. And I wish I could think of like and that's the thing as well. Sometimes the ideas seem really grandiose at the time, but then in retrospect, you go back and look at it and you're like, oh, it wasn't that great. I mean, that's common with cannabis as well. You think you have the most amazing ideas and you write them down, and then you go read it again, and it's just like, oh, okay, that was kind of maybe a mediocre idea at best. Um,
uh, I find I was going to mention that actually. I've been doing a fair bit of ketamine lately. I've been exploring ketamine for the last few months,
mhm,
a couple times a month maybe, and I really
mhm,
like it. It's good for. I find it's good for. What I'm mostly exploring with it is like I don't think of myself as an addict, but I have behaviors that I wish were different and more, like overeating or whatever. And
mhm.
I find that sort of ketamine seems to be a great medicine for working on modulating your behaviors.
Hmm. Mhm.
But my actual manifest um, uh, success rate, well, it's a work in progress. I can tell
Mhm.
that it's there, but it's like you do one session, you think I just solved all my problems,
Right,
but then you didn't.
right.
Uh, also the weird ideas thing that you're talking about. I've actually started, I notice I'll be having a great going really deep with ketamine, incredibly deep, doing really good work. And then I notice that like it's getting a little tinfoily. I know, but I have recognized this and I can even recognize it at the time. And I have to give myself little seeds, uh,
Yeah,
little like signposts.
yeah.
uh if there's a point where things are getting dark or weird, I give myself permission to steer away from that.
Mm.
And it might even be true, like what I mean is that I have to say, even if it's true that my body is being controlled by an outside alien, I'm giving myself permission to not go down that mental avenue because I know I don't like it. And
Hmm.
I give myself these little like signposts kind of like, oh, that's the road I don't want to go down.
Right.
And it helps me actually.
Yeah.
Another drug that I like a lot that is good for other things is Molly, MDMA or MDA, if you can find it. Um, and it's highly for me, highly creative. And
Mm.
I'll be like, this is what I'm doing with my life, you know.
Mhm.
This is the instrument I'm going to create, or this is the business
Right.
I'm going to create. And I noticed though that, like you say, they don't always meet. They don't always end up working out once
Right.
once the you're on the pavement and you're
Right.
actually trying to manifest these things. They just don't always turn out to be good ideas. Is careful though, because you want to be able to evaluate and let go, but that doesn't mean that the process itself doesn't have value.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, because I mean, if anything, okay, it might not be the world changing, earth-shattering idea that you thought it was, but it at least can kind of give you an inclination of just like, okay, what about that idea that I really like? You know, what sort of general direction is that pointing me in? Um, you know, I find that that's another thing why, comparing ketamine to salvia, for example, is with salvia, I don't get grandiose big ideas like that. Salvia is more like if she tells me to do something or if I get an idea of what to do, it's always like just the very next step. Ketamine is just like, here's everything, and this is ba da da. And so I think that feeling that comes with it, like, oh man, I just figured all this stuff out, that can kind of lead to like a inflated sense of ego at the time as well. Um, but with Salvia, it's more like, okay, here's just the very next thing you need to do. Okay, there you go. That's it. Let's move on now. And so it kind of like it keeps one in check, I find. Another thing is, so two things. One is, I was using ketamine, a fair amount in one stage, and but I noticed like there was too much of a draw to it. Like the novelty became very exciting, and it almost gave me the illusion that I was like having all these healing experiences when really it was just um, a the frequent presentation of a lot of novelty.
Hmm.
And but and I noticed as well like there was tolerance building as well, and so on and so forth. And um, so I think this is something that many people don't talk enough about because it is very real, but ketamine addiction is very real. It is an addictive substance for sure. And I'm not putting down ketamine therapy or anything like that. And but I think we need to be honest that it is an addictive substance and people do get very addicted, especially if they're using it intranasally. Less so if they're using it with lozenges, I believe. Um, but um, hadn't used salvia in a while, and I was using ketamine a little bit more than I would have liked, truth be told. And then I smoked some salvia, and I felt salvia coming in. And one of the things she said to me, she said, "Isn't it nice that I never offer diminishing returns?" He's just like, I'm always going to show up. You don't need more of me over time, because there's the reverse tolerance. And then after you have an experience with me, there's no desire or pull or draw to go back and do it again. Um, so it was just like stark contrast with, I noticed that the ketamine for me kind of felt like it had some tentacles that were beginning to get wrapped a
Oh,
little bit
uh-oh.
too.
Oh.
Um,
Yeah, I
so
pretty much feel the same. I still
yeah,
like it. I'm positive, but ketamine, you got to be a little bit careful with it.
Yeah, you got to be careful with ketamine. I'm not shitting on ketamine. It's very helpful for many people, and I've had some wonderful healing experiences on ketamine for sure. But knowing myself, knowing my personality, when something has a little bit of a tentacle pulling me towards it, and I feel cannabis can do the same thing for me as well. Um, I can just kind of like, oh, let me do that again, and then I find it kind of like on the back of my mind. But I find that that's not the case for salvia. But one thing I was going to say about those signposts that you feel you have when you like an entity is doing something to you and you could go down that dark path. Um, it reminded me of this one ketamine experience I had where I was laying in my bed and I saw this very menacing looking entity slowly approach me with like a pretty creepy grin. And he had like something, it had like a claw and it had something in its hand and its claw. And I thought to myself, like, oh, geez, this is kind of creepy, like what's going to happen to me when he gets to me with whatever it is in his hand. And so but what I said, and I said it out loud, I said something along the lines of like, "Oh, that's a cool thing that you have in your hand. Can I see it?" And as soon as I said that, the entity kind of like stopped, and then like the evil grin that it had changed to like a slightly more friendly grin, and then it just faded away. Um, and so for me, you know, what it felt like for me was I changed my reaction to the entity rather than being like, oh fuck, what's gonna happen when this thing gets to me? Instead, I was like, what actually is in your hand? And it did look kind of cool. So I wasn't lying, I was like, that does look like a kind of cool thing that you have in your hand. And I was curious to see what it was. So it changed from fear to genuine curiosity. Um, and so there was some interesting thing that then the entity seemed to be like, oh, yeah, maybe I just wanted to be treated with some curiosity instead of fear. Um, so so sometimes one doesn't have to tear one's awareness away from what's happening to one in these altered states, but rather one can just interact with them in a more different way. I mean, as well, it kind of makes me think of this one powerful ayahuasca experience I had where at one point I was just surrounded by these eyes that were just staring at me, but filled with judgment.
Mm,
Um, like, like the Blue Man Group,
yeah.
and they're all painted in blue. So imagine the Blue Man Group, but they're all painted in black.
Mm.
And so it was just their faces. It's like a sea of like very black faces in like a sea of darkness. So I could kind of see the silhouette of the face. Um, and then, but these piercing eyes just looking at me. And I was like, wow, these are the eyes of judgment. And it's sort of like the eyes of judgment that also let one know nothing you do or say will ever impress us. So it was almost like not only are we judging you, we're also highly unimpressed by you. And there's nothing that you can say that's ever going to change that. And so I was like, holy fuck, this is intense. Like they were all over the place looking at me. And I was like, so I realized at the time, I was like, okay, well, if these are the eyes of judgment, there's nothing I can say or do that's going to impress them. They are unconvincible. 'Cause that's the thing when someone's a big judger, they're very unconvincible of things because they're not open to hearing new ideas because their mind's already made up. And that's why they feel like they could come to such a clear and correct judgment as far as they're concerned. Um, and I was like, well, what do I do in response to this? So the only thing I could think of doing was just staring those eyes right back, just as they were staring at me. And I was just like, well, I could judge too, you know? So I just kind of started judging them back in the same way that they're judging me.
I can play
Um,
that game.
yeah, I can play the game. I was like, why not? Like, if you guys are so uncaring and so judging, I'm just going to be uncaring and judging straight back. And we just kind of like locked eyes. And initially it was intense because I was thinking, geez, I'm kind of locking eyes with like the eyes of judgment and not just two pairs, like a bunch of them. Um, but after a while, then that also just kind of like faded away. Um, and there was almost this sense of, um, they didn't say good job because they wouldn't go that far, but it was sort of like okay, we kind of respect that he can, play the same game back.
Mhm.
Um, which is interesting because by my nature, I'm not a judgy person, like at all. Like some people, I get surprised at how people can have such strong opinions on things, sometimes, especially considering how little they might actually know about the situation. Like,
Yeah.
how did everyone get such a strong opinion on this all of a sudden? So yeah, it was a good practice in you know, just being that sort of judgy back in a way. But I really thank goodness I'm not a judgy person by nature, because it's kind of an unpleasant feeling. At least it was for me. Because
Right. Yeah.
it's cold, you know.
Yeah. Totally.
There's something cold about judgment, cold and detached.
Yeah. And, inherently like, frustrated because if you're judging something as negative, be it a person or a whatever,
Mm,
it is necessary prerequisite that you could imagine the world being better,
right,
which means that you're coming from a point of frustration.
right. Yeah, that's true. Right, right.